Hey friends, hope you're doing well and ready for a nice semester of American government. I'm Devin Marconi. I'm going to be your professor this semester, and today's lecture we're going to focus on getting an understanding of this course, what's expected of you, the structure of how I'm going to present the information, and really just start this engagement. First off, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Devin Marconi. As I have already said, I am awkwardly talking into my own laptop, so I'll be a bit weird every now and then, but we're going to have a good time, and I hope some of you reach out to me whenever you can. I'm from the South. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, if you can't tell from the accent here and there. And I also got some northern family, got the parents from Brooklyn. So every now and then I'll throw out a coffee or water here and there. And you'll probably see a little bit about where I'm from just by how I talk. A little bit about my interests. I am a diehard Knicks fan, so if you ever want to talk about some basketball, you know I'm all in for that. But I'm also interested in whatever you guys want to talk about. I am always curious about what you have going on, what's going on in the Valley, and any ways in which we can connect over content that's not just American government. Uh, we're in this together. I want you to reach out to me, connect with me, and let's work together. Working as a team makes everything a lot better, a lot more fun, and a lot more engaging. So I'm excited to meet every one of you. With that being said, I need you guys to reach out to me. I'm going to present a 30-minute to an hour lecture every week. I'll email you guys frequently. I'll respond to your discussion posts here and there, but I need you to introduce yourself to me. That's why, for one, we have an introduction discussion post as well as our week one discussion post. So we'll talk about that later on. But through that, meet your classmates, introduce yourself to me and everyone else, and let's make this online class as personable as possible. So let's get going. As I said, primary purpose of this week's lecture is that we're going to get an overview of what's expected in this course, how we're going to be presenting information, how the lecture is going to be structured, expectations with certain assignments, although we'll have to go in more detail later on throughout the semester. But every semester, we're going to start, every week we're going to start with a learning objective slide. This is where I give you a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. This is a very generalized overview. I'm just going to try and hit some of the key points, emphasize what you should be really focusing on learning, and then at the end of the lecture, I will have two what do we learn slides. The first what do we learn slide will ask you the question that I hope you can answer after listening to this lecture, and the second gives you the answer. Now, this is going to be one of the most important studying tools in the future, as this is going to be directly a direct source of inspiration for the quiz and exam questions later on. So make sure you review your What Did We Learn slides. That'll be a great way to recap what we've talked about in these lectures, but also engage with the lectures. I'm going to give you the bullet points of information in the PowerPoint, but I'm going to dive into more detail verbally, and I need you to engage with that and listen, because some of those points I make verbally will be essential in discussion posts, assignments, and your essay and final exam. So for the most part, that is the primary goal today. We're going to talk about what political science is. I like to start with a few points of talking about the state, democracy, and what this field of study is at large that I think are important for anybody who's considering political science as a career to understand. And then we're going to dive into the lecture. We're going to start talking about some of this content as we do in a lot of these college courses. It starts moving fast. So we're going to dive into a little bit of content just to give you another visualization and representation of what a lecture is going to look like in the future, and to just give you a quick foundation of what you'll need to understand to be able to thrive in this class. If a lot of what we talk about today is extremely foreign, go online, look up some YouTube videos. I'll of course give you every bit of information you need to succeed in this course, but it might be beneficial to refresh yourself on some of the more entertaining aspects of early American history. So let's get going. So first off, the course overview. One of the most important parts of this class is the discussion posts. And we're going to have discussion posts and participation acting as 10%. Discussion posts, I'll go over in the next slide the exact requirements, but you will have to post every single week. You will have to post multiple times throughout the week. And it is very easy to do this, but just as easy to get distracted and let this fall to the wayside, and you must maintain frequent discussion post engagement to have a good grade in this class. Additionally, we're going to have a 10% on 10% of your grade is going to be reliant on your midterm. Now, the midterm will be a one-page essay. This is going to be a rough draft of the first page of your final essay. And I do this so you can really get some of your good ideas and bad ideas out of the way early on before you write a whole page, a whole paper about them. It's also an opportunity for you to write a paper and get detailed and direct feedback on how you can improve your writing to be as good as it could be. Now, I know some of you use AI. I know I'm young. I might look a little wrinkled in the forehead, but I'm in my 20s still. I know your strategies. So I will be keeping an eye out. I know what AI looks like. I know how to check for AI. I know other avenues of cheating. Don't use Google. A lot of these questions on quizzes will be framed in ways that Google will give you a slightly different answer and it will be very easily identifiable. So don't be trying any of that because I will keep an eye out for it. So AI, you will get caught. And the midterm, if you write it with AI, you're hurting yourself because I'm giving you detailed engagement. That's not going to result in point deductions on your grade. You'll get a grade based off of meeting the core requirements for the assignment, which you'll see in a document that I will post, but I will give feedback based on how you can improve, which will be very detailed. Now, if you wrote an AI paper and turn in an AI, one-page midterm introduction, you will be clueless when you're trying to write your final paper. And you try and write a final paper with AI, it's going to be the most obvious thing ever, and I will catch that immediately. So stay on top of things, be respectful to me, I'll be respectful to you by engaging with your content deeply, and no matter what your opinions are, I will respect them and help you strengthen them. So let's work together. Quizzes, important part of your grade. What do we learn slides are going to be essential for studying for your quizzes. We'll talk about that later on. 4 quizzes, 3 will be counting towards your final grade. Your lowest quiz grade will get dropped. We have class assignments. There will be at least 5 classroom assignments. Your syllabus says 4, but I've recently added one, and there will likely be more added later on. These assignments will be very direct. There will be Word documents that I post on Eagle Online to give you direct requirements for them and guidelines. And I, of course, will always be available for help and assistance when working on these assignments. And additionally, we will have a final essay and a final exam. I'll give you a little bit of extra time towards the end of the semester to make sure you have time to write your final essay and study for your final exam. But it is worth noting that you will have both of these at the end of the semester due at roughly the same time. So keep an eye out for them and do not put them off until the very end. That is why we do the midterm as the first page of your essay, so you can get a head start on all of this, and that final essay at the end of the semester will not hit you too hard. So let's do this. Let's engage with each other's content, be respectful in those discussion posts, and respond to them. And ask your classmates a question directly. If you don't do that, I will be deeply saddened, and you will have points deducted. So let's go in depth. So discussion posts. Every Wednesday you will have to present, every Wednesday of an odd numbered week. So week 1 is an odd numbered week. You will have to present a single original post to the discussion prompt. This is a detailed, at least 4-sentence answer to what I'm asking you in the discussion prompt. This week's is we have an introduction prompt discussion, and we additionally have a discussion post asking you about your favorite definition of democracy. I ask you which definition presented in this lecture today rings true to you, and additionally to define democracy in your own words, absent of those definitions. Please present a detailed discussion, 4-sentence discussion post with proper grammar and respect for the content. Reference the lecture, readings, outside resources. You don't have to cite them directly, but reference them. Make it an engaging post. That is due every Wednesday of odd number weeks. Odd number weeks, you also have an assignment due on Sunday. By Sunday, you have to respond to 2 different classmates' original posts. So ask them a question about what their answer to democracy was. Say, oh, that's so fascinating. I identify democracy in a different way. What aspect of government do you focus on when you define this term? Engage with them and ask them a detailed question. If you don't ask a question, point deduction. And that is every odd numbered week. And then the following week, every even numbered week, next week, week 2, you will have a single follow-up post. So the person who commented on your original post just respond to their question. You only have to do one of these. So you might have multiple people commenting on your post. You only have to pick one, engage with them, and you're good. At the end of every 2-week period, every discussion post should have 4 discussion posts from you as an individual. If you are short on that, you will have significant grade deductions. So keep an eye out. The first 2 discussion posts will give you a good understanding of precisely how I will grade them. I will give you comments if you have certain weak points or areas where I would deduct a point in the future or would in the moment. So keep an eye out on that. Feel free to email me with any questions regarding the discussion. Now, let's talk about my career, political science, this topic, this field of study. Well, political science is the study of governmental systems, the people that run them, and the people they govern. So it's you, your government, and the intermediaries between you and your government. Now, I always say when I define political science casually, I think it is the least scientific part of our lives, a part of humanity that we try and make the most scientific. Because to make an observation about the way people feel, think, or are governed, you have to be founded in objective truths. So that's what this is aiming to do. We're taking this very abstract way of life and trying to make it a science, trying to provide generalizations and definitions for the way we behave. So when you study political science in college, there are 3 subdisciplines, but you could also get a variation of 4 different concentrations. 1, American government, because we're in America and we're studying government, just like this course. How fascinating. But there are other subdisciplines of political science. There's political theory. I teach one of these courses at this college as well, and I encourage any of you to take that class if it fits your course requirements, in which we talk about the theoretical and foundations to these ideas and the way we behave in government. We talk about some of the great theorists, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Edmund Burke, Rousseau, Machiavelli, some great writers, thinkers that really conceptualized what it means to be a human in a system of governance. A very fascinating subdiscipline, and you really engage in why things are, why the way things ought to be, and why things are the way they are. International relations is very contemporary. You're focusing on today's news. You're talking about wars, conflict, international collectives. You're talking about the international stage of politics in which every nation has significant sway. You're talking about the way we work with other nations. And then you could look at comparative politics, which is more or less a study which is quite clearly in the word comparing what America is to, say, India, governmental structures of all nations throughout the entire world. Very fascinating stuff. And whenever you study any of these subdisciplines, you're going to be utilizing history, philosophy, linguistics, economics, psychology, demography, and so much more. That it is a science of all the social sciences combined. It is a beautiful field. I recommend it for anybody and everyone, as long as you're ready to dedicate to it. I would love to answer any questions if you want to email me about political science, careers in political science, and anything revolving around that. But let's make the least scientific part of our lives as scientific as possible as a team. So I always like to do this. What we're going to do here is we're going to cover 4 different definitions of the term a state, and we will see at the end which one rings the most true. I ask you as I go over these definitions to try and identify with one. Really look at these definitions, which one is most truly representative of what you think a state is. Remember, not like Virginia or Montana. Think about United States, Mexico, Canada, China, those definitions of a state. So the first definition, again, make a note of which one is most true to you. First definition is any power which has authority over men. Men, that's already might be a little outdated to some of us. Any power which has authority, so very hierarchy focused. There must be a system of authority in place. There must be power, hierarchy of some level. The second definition, we move on, we see, quote, a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. That is a lot to unpack. Let's break it down a little bit. Human community successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force. We could view that as there's police, and police have the authority to use physical force and nobody else unless they're breaking a law. The monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force. And then within a given geographical territory. Those three requirements for a state. It's kind of scientific in a sense. It's kind of like what I just said on the last slide. Least scientific aspect of humans, and let's make it as scientific as possible. Let's identify requirements. Fascinating definition of a state. 3, quote, a union of families and villages having for its end a perfect and self-sufficing life, by which we mean a happy and honorable life, end quote. That's poetic, one would say. It's beautiful. I like that idea. Families and villages starting at the local level. Government, a state really is focused on a community on some sense. And for its end, what is the end goal of a state? Well, it's a perfect and self-sufficing life. Well, we would all only align with the state if we were all aiming to be happier and more honorable people. Fascinating, poetic, beautiful way of seeing a state. You could also see the focus on small-scale community. 4th, a body of free persons united together for the common benefit, to enjoy peaceably what is their own, and to do justice to others. Very pretty. Again, a more zoomed out way of seeing government. A body of free persons. It's not families and villages. It's all free persons, regardless of unification. United together for the common benefit. Well, they're united for a common benefit. To enjoy peaceably what is their own, for peace and security, one could say, and to do justice to others, and reliance on a system and society. So these are all very fascinating definitions, and I hope you really identified one, you wrote it down, and you're listening and seeing what aspects of it really spoke to you. Well, I want to emphasize that every single definition you have just heard is completely adequate and respected on the world stage. The first definition, you might have identified the simplicity in it, the hierarchy needs, the focus on authority, and might have ignored the men outdated aspect. And you might agree with Niccolo Machiavelli, a great Renaissance thinker who wrote about, well, the power structures of government. Simply put, if you're interested in political theory, we talk about him in my theory course a lot. Now, if you looked at the very requirement based, it's kind of like they identified 3 pillars of a state. That definition comes from 1946, when a German political theorist wrote about what a state is and compared the states of the world to other entities. Very, very fascinating reader. One of the most respected political theorists of the 20th century. And so we see Max Weber presenting that definition. We see this third definition, the beautiful definition, humans, families, and villages. Well, that stems from a very ancient idea of a state. One of our first political theorists, Aristotle, writing well before Machiavelli, well before Max Weber, writing about the state through the lens of families and villages. Very beautiful, virtuous, localized way of seeing a state. And then we see that final definition. Wow, that's a judicial definition right there. And we see it that way because it is the definition provided by the United States Supreme Court. So we see these are all definitions presented by vastly respected individuals with a depth of knowledge regarding what a state is. But when we look at them and we make requirements for what would need to be done to strengthen these different definitions of a state, we would probably see different requirements to strengthen them. Different definitions, although they can be widely respected about key terms in political science, can come with different interpretations of understanding. We see that if you want to strengthen Machiavelli, the first definition of a state, you wanted to strengthen a state in which you define like that, you would strengthen the powers of authority. You would strengthen the police entities. Now, if you wanted to strengthen a state utilizing Aristotle's definition, that third definition, you would maybe even dismantle some of those entities and focus on strengthening the family units, the villages, the localized entities, and you would focus on providing public goods that make people happier and provide a more honorable life. Very different definitions of the same thing that require very different aspects of very different tools to strengthen them. So when you talk about any form of politics and you use a state, use a term as simple as a state. Think about the way the person you're talking to might be defining that simple term. And since we spent so much time defining a state, let's be a little quicker with our definition of a democracy. We see this first definition, a deviant constitution for the benefit of the poor, but not for its common profit. That's an interesting definition of a democracy, a bit, some would say pessimistic. Deviant constitution. That's interesting. We'll come back to that one. Second, quote, a government of, by, and for the people. It's a bit pretty. I think we've all heard that one before. We'll come back to that again in a second. And the final definition of a democracy is the institutional arrangement for arriving at political decisions in which individuals acquire the power to decide by means of a competitive struggle for the people's vote. The third definition of democracy is the first time we hear any reference to electoral systems. The first time we hear the word vote. Fascinating. You could define a democracy twice without even getting to the term voting or elections. So let's backtrack. That first definition, a deviant constitution for the benefit of the poor, but not for its common profit, comes from Aristotle's works. Aristotle defined a democracy as not even the most ideal form of governance. And if you take my political theory course, we can dive into that. We will not be covering it in American government, though. The second definition, a very American definition, one could say, coming from Abraham Lincoln, a government of, by, and for the people. This is one that, when I ask that discussion prompt, most of you identify with this one. It's simple, it's true, and it's straight to the point. Of, by, and for the people. Now, does that directly reference elections? No, it could, but it doesn't directly reference any elections. It doesn't really provide core requirements, but it provides a sentiment, an ethos of what a democracy is. And then the third definition, the institutional arrangement for arriving at political decisions for which individuals acquire the power to decide by means of a competitive struggle for the people's vote. If you haven't figured this out already, this was written by a political scientist. Just like Max Weber's definition, this is a bit detailed, provides foundations, requirements for a democracy. And this definition was written by a world-renowned and greatly respected political scientist, Joseph Schumpeter. And it is the first time we see the requirement of an election. Now again, ask yourself, if you were talking to somebody who used a different definition of the word democracy, would you too, without talking about it, have the same understanding of what is required to strengthen a said democracy? If you use that third definition, you must strengthen the power for people to vote, the electoral institutions. If you rely on that first definition, strengthening this form of government would look widely different. Now think about the definitions others use when you talk about such commonly used words like democracy. Now, we've talked about democracy, but what type of democracy is present within the United States? Well, first, there are two generalized forms of democracy. There is a direct democracy and a representative democracy. A direct democracy is one in which the people govern the state directly by the state holding a vote before performing any action, while a representative democracy is one in which citizens have the power and right to elect representatives to govern the state accordingly. The United States is a representative democracy as we elect officials to represent us on the federal and state level. We'll go in detail about what that means regarding the federal and state level. But it is important to have a foundational understanding that we are not a direct democracy, although we do have referendums and ballot initiatives that give us access in a sense as if it were a direct democracy, but we have since our origins been a representative democracy. Now, some of you might be broiling over there in your seats, like, we're a republic, we're a republic, as I've had people in my classes yell out at me before. And you're right. But when we look at our founding fathers, especially James Madison, one of the greatest American political theorists, some could argue, he writes the Federalist Papers, a significant amount of them. And in Federalist Paper 10 and 14, he references a republic. And in the definition we can identify through these texts, a republic is a regime, a system of government, in which a scheme of representation takes place. What does that mean? It is a system of government in which you have representative democracy. That is the definition utilized by James Madison when defining the United States, when defining a republic, which is equally translatable to the term representative democracy in today's sense. Now, democracy, simply put, in these same texts, James Madison defined it as a small extent of territory with constant assembly to make laws and address important matters. So in this sense, our founding fathers did not identify with a democracy as much as they identified with a republic. We did not have constant referendums. We only had roughly 2% voting in our early elections. Instead, we had schemes of representation in which gave the general population access to government more easily. And this was a republic, but we are also referring to it as a representative democracy. Now, when we talk about these systems of government, as I said before, we elect individuals on the state and federal level. Well, the way that the state and federal governments interact with each other tells us the system of government we have in place. There are three primary systems of government that can be implemented, and throughout early American history, we tried implementing two of these three forms. We had, under the Articles of Confederation, which we will talk about in a little bit, we had a confederal system of government. That is the image you see in the middle, in which all power stems from the state entities and is designated upwards. So in that sense, the governor of a state may have more political sway than the president of the United States. That was the system, simply defined, that we had in place during the Articles of Confederation. We had a weak central entity and strong individualized state governments. Now, we also have a unitary system, which is the inverse relationship. You can see this represented in the graphic over here to the left, in which the central government is the primary power of authority and responsibilities are designated downwards to the state entities, the weaker state entities. And then we have not implemented a unitary system of government in the United States in our past. Again, that is the graphic you see to your left. A confederal system is the graphic you see in the middle, and then to the right, that equal exchange of power between the central government and the state entities. That is what we currently have, a federal system of government, where there are powers designated to both entities, although there are times where you may have one reign supreme over another, they both are designated clear powers and responsibilities. We have a federal system of government in the current United States, although under the Articles of Confederation, we were a confederal system of government. Familiarize yourself with this graphic and these three definitions, because they will, hint, hint, be on a quiz in the future. Now, here are the written definitions for those three terms that we just covered. I won't spend too much time, but remember, federal system maintains an equal distribution of power between the state and federal entities. Confederal system, all power originates from the states while they are loosely united through a weak central government. And a unitary system, all powers originate from a very strong centralized body of government. This system does not grant that much power to the states and relies on a strong federal government. These are important terms to take notes on and familiarize yourself with, as they will be repeated throughout this semester. Now, let's rewind a bit. Before we even had the Articles of Confederation, we had to go through what was known as the American Revolution. We will not spend much time at all on this issue, but it is essential for us to remember some of the reasons why we had a revolution, some of the reasons why Britain was incentivized to maintain the colonies in the United States. Well, what was not yet known as the United States, just known as the colonies. Now, the colonists had an incentive to hold a revolution. As we all know, this is primarily high school history review. Remember the Boston Massacre. Many individuals' lives were lost. We had violence as British soldiers shot into a field of protesters that were reported to have been throwing rocks at the British soldiers. And this is something that we will revisit in next week's lecture as we talk about John Adams' role in the Boston Massacre. But this influenced broiling emotions among the colonists. Now we also see the tax on tea and the Stamp Act. Increased taxes without granting representation really harmed the general sentiment within the colonies at the time and incentivized further revolution. But when we also, and we're not going to spend much time on this because we know all of this from high school history. But we also remember, and we might not remember this with as much detail, the incentives for Britain to avoid a revolution and maintain the colonies. Well, we know that they benefited from the raw materials, but we have to understand that they primarily benefited from a monopoly of trade with the United States. They could buy these raw materials, these goods from the United States, and sell them at whatever prices on the international stage they desired. They had complete sole control of the United States market. Again, it was not referred to as the United States. I'm just saying that out of comfort. The colonies' market and trade. So Britain was extremely benefiting from the monopolization on trade, although they were not able to maximize the benefits that they could obtain through this avenue before we had an American Revolution. That is a time period and some details that you could spend a degree studying, but we're just going to try and talk about it briefly in one slide. So after the American Revolution, we implemented what was referred to as the Articles of Confederation. We have revolted against the empire. We have implemented a new system, and what will this system do? Well, what we wanted it to do was we wanted it to avoid becoming another monarchy. We did not want to revolt against Britain just to become a new Britain on the other side of the Great Pond. We also wanted to acknowledge that we had a collection of very diverse and unique regions. You had Virginia and New York. They were very, very different in their government structures and their economies primarily. And we needed the unification of these collectives to maintain a united government. So we needed to avoid the secession of states. We needed to keep the United States united. Well, the Articles united. We also wanted to avoid becoming subservient to foreign powers. We didn't want to incur mass amounts of debt to build this nation, only to become subservient to the Dutch or to the French instead of the British. We also wanted to protect natural rights. At the time of creating the Articles of Confederation, liberalism was on the rise. Not contemporary liberalism like you may think about with the Democratic Party, but liberalism stemming from the writings and ideas of John Locke, those great early philosophers that we would talk about in political theory that focused on individual rights, natural rights, unalienable rights of all human beings, using the state of nature to identify what is granted to all humans based solely on their existence. And then we also see an idea that we must protect laws from men. Government must be one that can persist beyond the whims of emotion, the ideology of any individual, but must be structured to be long-lasting and not vulnerable to emotion. So we implemented the Articles of Confederation, a very weak central government. And in this government, we were unable to mobilize troops. We were unable to respond to conflict within our domestic borders. A moment in history that revealed this is Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion was a farmers' rebellion in Massachusetts between 1786 and 1787. It really only lasted from September to February, so a few months, in which a little over 1,000 individuals attacked, and this was led by an individual by the name of Daniel Shay. They were revolting because after the revolution, they were actually under higher taxes than they were under British rule. So this resulted in, of course, immense discontent among these individuals. We'll talk about an individual by the name of Samuel Adams, a revolutionary thinker, a leader in early American history, even came out openly opposed to this revolution to this rebellion, more or less. And the primary takeaway when you look at history from this rebellion is that the federal government was far too slow to respond. Our Congress was not able to pass legislation that responded in any meaningful way because they needed unanimous support among all representatives, all states, and that was far too difficult to obtain. The government moved far too slow. Beyond the fact that the government legislatively moved too slow, the troops and the military, there was no national military, so they were having a very hard time mobilizing troops to respond to the conflict and minimize the physical harm. In this conflict, in this rebellion, 4 individuals died and 20 were wounded. And although minimal numbers, the economic, political, and social impact was long lasting. And this moment, the key takeaway, the thing you should star in your notes, is the Shays Rebellion revealed the detriments of a confederal system of government and revealed that the Articles of Confederation was far too weak. So we have a failed form of government. You might not know that the United States government, federal system of government, was our second attempt at independence. Our first attempt was the Articles of Confederation, which was far too weak. It had a very weak federal government. And remember, a confederation is a voluntary association of independent states. It must be a weak unification because they all have to maintain their true independence as states. And we remember that through the last slide, Shays Rebellion, that farmers Massachusetts in which 4 people died and 20 wounded, led by Daniel Shays over the issue of increased taxes, revealed that the federal government could not respond legislatively or militarily to any conflict, even within its own borders, which brought on a significant degree of introspection and revealed that we needed a stronger form of government, a stronger unification among the states. So, what did we learn? Again, every lecture is going to be structured like this. We will always have some what do we learn slides where I ask you the questions that you need to understand deeply and be able to answer when it comes to quiz time. So, a lot of times I will not lecture on this because I've already dove into this in detail during the presentation, during the slides, and you have to listen to those because they are essential to succeed in this course. If you don't listen, you'll be confused and you will probably be annoyed with me at some point this semester for giving you a great deduction which you're clueless about, but if you listen to the lectures, you would know exactly why. So, how do you define political science as state and democracy? Well, it's nuanced. Political science, of course, have a pretty concrete definition. It's an interesting field of study, and if you're interested in the way authority is distributed, political science may be your cup of tea. The state and democracy, though, I use as examples of 2 of the most simple terms, simple definitions of key terms utilized in politics, and how diverse the definitions and requirements to strengthen these defined entities is. So when you talk about any form of politics, when you use a word like the state, democracy, or liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, understand that when you use these words, you're mobilizing different visuals, different definitions, different variables for strengthening these entities based on the different definition that you utilize. So try and, instead of defending your perspective, present your definitions when you talk about these issues. And I hope we can do that throughout this course. I'm dying, one second. Talking nonstop to a computer, it gets your throat. So we also know that the United States is not a direct democracy, and we are instead a representative democracy. Our founding fathers referred to it as a republic, and a republic is a regime in which there is a scheme of representation in place. We also remember that there are 3 types of governance. We have a unitary, confederal, and federal. The United States has maintained 2 of these systems, confederal and federal. Under the Articles of Confederation, we were a confederal system, a collective of sovereign states loosely connected on the national stage. And then we also see that this was far too weak, revealed by the Shays Rebellion, in which the federal government could not respond or mobilize quick enough. And we needed to implement a federal system in which we strengthen our federal government. And remember, a unitary is where you have a heavily strengthened central government. They're the sole authority of governance. We have never had a unitary system of government, although Alexander Hamilton really wanted one. All right, here are your answers to the questions I just asked you in that last slide. Now, this was just an introduction to me and the way I lecture. We're going to be covering some more detailed content throughout every lecture in this semester. You do have some assignments, and when we get to the later on lectures, I'll start next week really. I'll have another slide after this where I tell you what is due. But I want you to move around Eagle Online, work on crafting an email to me to make sure you understand what's due. So let's work together to make sure we have an understanding of these requirements. I'm doing this because I want to identify where the holes are in Eagle Online. Where in this new online platform, because before we use D2L, now we're using Canvas, where do you not see assignments? Where do you not see that this or that is due? If you can help me identify that in the first 2 weeks, we'll solve any of these problems before they come up on serious assignments. So it was great to meet you guys. Email me, introduce yourself, tell me what you like. If you got a favorite sports team, let's talk trash. I'm really excited to meet you guys. I'm in LRC 140, the Learning Resource Center. I think they're changing the name of the building, but like, you know what building that is, where the student lounge is. I'm in room 140. Mondays and Fridays, I'm there all day. Stop by, introduce yourself. Say I'm in the online class. I'd love to put a face to the name, and I'd love to introduce myself as well. So I'm excited to work with you guys, and I hope you have a great semester. We got this. Reach out. We are in this together. You're not alone.